Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Marty Ross, and this is another Conversations with Marty Ross MD tonight. This is a webinar about Lyme disease, and you created each week with your questions. We did one last week. We'll do one again next week, and then I'll take a week off after that. So this is the second of the August series. If you want to write a question to me, the way you do that is there is a chat box over here on the bottom, down there on the bottom. And you would write your question to me. I ask that you hit the enter key only one time during the question. Each time you hit the enter key, it sends a question to me. So if you do that multiple times, it gets to be hard for me to find those pieces of the question on my end. It'll get mixed in with all the other questions coming in too. Often I'm not able to get through every question, but I'll try to the best of my ability to get through as many as I can tonight. I am creating a recording of the webinar, so if you happen to miss part of an answer or you want to hear it again, tomorrow morning around 6:30 in the morning, Seattle time, I usually send out an email to you telling you that the recording is ready if you want to go ahead and watch it, okay? If you happen not to get that, go ahead and around 6:30 in the morning, Seattle time tomorrow, which is 3 hours different than the East Coast here in the States, go to treatlyme.net and go to the webinars page. There's a link to my recordings page there. And through that, you can watch the webinar as well, too. Okay. At the end of the visit, too, I'll take you back to the treatlyme.net website where you can sign up for next week's webinar. But also in the email tomorrow morning, you'll also have a chance to sign up for next week's webinar, too. During the webinar tonight, I will post your questions that I'm answering. I'm going to read them as well because for sometimes it's hard to read them, even though I'm posting them on the screen for you to see them. Trying to think if there's anything else I need to say. I don't think so. I think I've said the basics here. I just want to let you know I see a number of new names on my participant list tonight, but I see a lot of returns too. For those of you that are back, I'm glad to see you again. And let's see what we can do tonight. Okay, so let's go ahead and take the first question here. Hello, Yolanda. Let's see. I have been trying to get my vitamin D levels up. I take 10,000 daily, but it's not working. Do you have any recommendation to raise my levels? Should I do 50,000 weekly? How long? So clearly you're probably having some kind of an absorption issue. The one thing I would want to make sure that you might want to talk with your docs about is and also just based on your symptoms, sometimes if you happen to have too many yeast living in the intestines, that will interfere with absorption of vitamin D and other nutrients. One way to find out if you might have too many yeast is to just see if you have symptoms that suggest it. Okay, so symptoms that suggest too many yeast are sugar cravings, increased intestinal gasiness or bloating. Sometimes having pimples and acne can be a sign because yeast release toxins that interact with your skin and can give you pimples or acne. Sometimes having vaginal itching, vaginal discharge, if you're a woman, can be a sign of having too many yeast too. If you've got too many yeast, that may be interfering. If those are not a problem, I would just keep taking progressively more. And yeah, you may need to do the 50,000 weekly. That might be a way to get it up as well too. Beyond that, I don't have any other recommendations. All right. Thanks for the question, Yolanda. Good luck to you. Hello, Eric. Let's see. Hi, Dr. Ross. Is it normal for Bartonella to reactivate while I'm treating Babesia? It seems like I am getting Bartonella symptoms more and more as I treat Babesia. Calf pain, heel pain, pins and needles, legs falling asleep, finger joint inflammation. So, Eric, so about 95% of the time that I treat Bartonella using one of my regimens, and you can read what those regimens are in my Treat Lyme book at the treatlyme.net. As many of you know, I usually recommend you do 2 antibiotics at a time to treat Bartonella for the most effective treatments. But typically a 2 antibiotic regimen for Bartonella will work 95% of the time to get rid of Bartonella. But about 5% of people will have relapse problems. And so it is possible that you could be having those symptoms back. But the other thing to make sure of is that you don't have something else triggering those symptoms, all right? So one thing that can look like Bartonella, if Bartonella gets more active, is yeast. I wonder if this night's going to be my yeast theme, but when things go backwards, one of the things I always do first is to ask questions to make sure that yeast has not shown up. And the issue with yeast is if you get too many yeast in the intestines, they trigger your immune system to make more inflammation chemicals called cytokines. They also release toxins, and the big one is something called gliotoxin. And gliotoxin is a neurotoxin, which could even be giving you some of the heel pain, or the pins and needle sensations, your legs falling asleep. The increased cytokines from yeast could be giving you more of your calf pain and your joint pain. Okay, so the same questions I just went through with that last question, trying to figure out if you have too many yeast, you should look at those as well too. But to answer your question, could Bartonella return? Yeah, it can. About 5% of the time it does. Okay, so I'm going to do a quick screen share. I want to show people some resources here. And that I'm going to show you an article in the chapter called Yeast. And so this is my chapter on yeast, things related to yeast. Okay, one of those is to keep yeast at bay. I prefer having people be on a paleo diet for many reasons, of which one is keeping yeast at bay. And then in terms of figuring out if you have too many yeast, take a look at this article called A Silent Problem. Do you have yeast? I walk you through different ways of figuring that out. And then in terms of what you could do to prevent yeast, I like this article called To Treat Yeast. I talk about many ways to get rid of yeast here in this article called Kills Yeast, A Brief Guide. Okay. Let's see. Yeah, anyhow, that's my chapter on yeast. Okay. And then in terms of, as I mentioned earlier, I usually think that, or I find that the most effective Bartonella treatments are ones that use multiple antibiotics, or 2 antibiotics at a time, that is. To see what I recommend, how you might mix those treatments together, take a look at my article in the infection treatment plan chapter called Kills Bartonella, A Brief Guide. In that article, I explain the various antibiotic regimens you can use to get rid of your Bartonella. Okay, let me go back here. Eric, I hope that gives you some insights there. The other point I would make is that if you happen to have a Bartonella relapse, when you treat it again, try to use a different 2-drug regimen than you did before. Okay? All right. Good luck to you. Hello, Catherine. Let's see. My lab results for Borrelia hermsii, IgG, is 1 to 64. My doctor says that it is positive. The lab says no. They are saying non-reactive. I have been ill for 3 years now. I was bit in Chile. Please clarify. Technically, that is a negative test. I would call it a negative test. Now, you might say it's a partially reactive test, but it's not the full threshold to say it is definitely Lyme. I will tell you, though, that test is only one part of what you consider in making a decision if somebody has a Lyme, that is, not Bartonella, Lyme. And so in making a Lyme disease diagnosis, there's 4 things I consider, okay? One is there a risk of getting it, okay? So the highest risk would be having a tick bite. And the really highest risk would be having a tick bite in New Jersey, where 95 to 100% of ticks carry Lyme, or out in Long Island, for instance, in areas that have a lot of Lyme, okay? But 50% of the time people have Lyme, they do not remember a tick bite. So the second thing that I consider is, what do the symptoms tell me? Are there a lot of symptoms that suggest Lyme? And if there are a lot of symptoms that suggest Lyme, have other reasonable explanations or causes of those symptoms been figured out and ruled out? And if they have, then that starts looking a lot more like Lyme, okay? Number 3, I look at, are there any physical exam findings? And number 4, I consider, is there a supportive test, all right? Now, you might call that a weakly supportive test, but it's not technically positive. I think the best way to look actually to see if you have Lyme is to actually get a Western blot. This is not a Western blot you had done. This was an antibody level. But Western blot, I think, is the best way to look and see. It'll find Lyme if you have it. If you do the Western blot through a lab called IGeneX, their method of doing a Western blot will find Lyme about 80 to 85% of the time. Okay? All right. So there is, if you want to see more about this, I just briefly walked through it. I have a 15-minute video about how do you diagnose Lyme, even when testing is negative. Okay? So let me do a quick screen share here. How to diagnose right here. All right, and then here is my video article called How to Diagnose Chronic Lyme Disease More Than a Test. I even explain the Western blot here to you as well. All right. So I would do that as a starting point for how do you figure out if you have Lyme disease. Okay. All right. Let me go back. Hello, Marie. Let's see. Hi. Thanks a lot for your help. You're welcome. Trying to treat parasites. Can Alinea be used for less than 21 days? Other Lyme doctors suggest 6 days. Also met someone who had tinea and had similar symptoms, always very hungry, losing weight. Can Alinea treat tinea or only biltricide? Can Lyme give similar symptoms? So I know, there's no ideal length to use Alinea in terms of treating parasites. I tend to use it for 21 days. I just find better results for that if I'm thinking that somebody might have parasites. Now, keep in mind with parasites, the best way to know to what to use to treat is if you actually do stool testing and those tests come back showing the specific parasite, because then they can test it against, the lab can test it against various agents to find out what's the best choice, okay? But the problem with parasites is that even if you have them, they're often hard to tell in a lab. Usually the way we tell if you have parasites is we look under a microscope and we're looking for dead parasite parts, arms and legs, if you will, egg parts, and we're trying to identify what that parasite is, or even a full parasite, okay? But it's hard to see. They're hard to see sometimes. And they're usually going to the person lower down on the totem pole, if you will, in the lab. So you may not be getting the best reviewer of some of these samples as well, too. So if I've got somebody that's done a lot of international travel where they might have picked up parasites, or somebody that has been exposed or had a lot of well water, even if they say that the wellhead is safe, sometimes parasites can still get through. And if they have symptoms such as you're describing, where you have massive amounts of hunger and losing weight, I am going to treat for parasites. And I like using Alinea as my choice because Alinea is useful against a broad range of parasites. I kind of call it the shotgun approach, if you will, to treating parasites. The mechanism by how it works is it should treat most parasites, okay? That's my preference. For 3 weeks, it can be kind of expensive medicine. It can be run up around $1,200 or $1,300. And so often insurance companies will not want to cover it unless you can prove you have a parasite with a lab test. But again, that's hard to do. In terms of tinea, I wonder if I don't know this parasite spelled Tenia. Now, you may mean tinea, which is a fungus infection, which is spelled Tinia. And if it's just a regular fungus infection, then I like to use antifungals, not Alinea. Okay, so antifungals like diflucan, fluconazole, itraconazole. So I'm not familiar with what you mean by tinea. If it is a true parasite, I just don't recognize it. Okay, but if you mean tinea, which is fungus infection, that's spelled Tinia, then you would use an antifungal agent, not an antiparasitic like Alinea. Okay. Now, one last thing. A number of my colleagues like to use Alinea to treat Lyme, and I think it can help. It is the mechanism by which it works is it treats what are called anaerobic organisms. So anaerobic means things that don't require oxygen. All right, and Lyme is an anaerobic bacteria. Parasites generally are anaerobic. Okay. Now, the only one that's not anaerobic that I know none of my colleagues try to use Alinea for is the parasite called Babesia, which lives in your red blood cells. Okay. Your red blood cells are full of oxygen. So I'm not quite clear that Babesia is anaerobic, actually. So I don't find that good a success in using it to treat Babesia. I have tried it that way before, but I haven't found it successful. All right. So those are just my ramblings about Linnea here. All right. I'd like to, Marie. Hello, Rita. Let's see. I read the account of Dr. Burrascano who cured himself of Lyme by doing 4 rounds of pulsed antibiotics, 2 months on, 2 months off, times 4. If Lyme travels with 1 or more co-infections, usually Babs or Bartonella, how is he able to pulse their rapid replication time? Thoughts? Thanks for what you do. So Rita raises a good point. So if there are co-infections like Babesia or Bartonella, those co-infections replicate rapidly. And you want to treat, you don't want to pulse. In my opinion, we shouldn't be pulsing when we have Babesia or Bartonella because the time that you're off the antibiotics are going to come back fast. By comparison, Lyme replicates slowly, maybe every 4 weeks, for instance, okay? And because it replicates so slowly, during that time you're off antibiotics, you don't get massive regrowth of the germ, setting you backwards, all right? So Bartonella, for instance, we know replicates about every 24 hours, okay? So Burrascano, by the time he did this 4 month on, 4 month off, 2 month on, 2 month off, 4 rounds, I believe had already taken care of his co-infections, okay? Now, I don't know that for sure, but I think when he talked about doing this, it's not for co-infections, it's for the Lyme germ that remains, okay? All right. Now, I have used his 2 month on, 2 month off. He claims cure. I've done it with a number of people. I don't know that I've ever cured somebody of it before, but there are a number of people that actually get a lot better on this 2 month on, 2 month off regimen. And I think what's happening in a 2 month on, 2 month off regimen is a few things. Number one, the longer we use antibiotics, more of the germs will convert over into cyst forms, which are harder to treat, and will convert into biofilm communities where they get covered by a layer of slime that blocks out treatment, okay? So by being off antibiotics for a couple months, it allows those germs to migrate back out of cyst forms, maybe into spirochete, maybe into intracellular Lyme forms, okay? And also will allow a lot of those germs to pop back out of biofilms so that at the end of 2 months, they're in an easier to treat state, okay? Secondly, there's newer research that came out about 2 years ago showing that Lyme has the ability to develop something called a persister cell, or a persister form, I guess I should call it. So what persisters are, according to some Petri dish research, when Lyme is exposed to ongoing antibiotics on the Petri dish experiments that were published out of Northeastern University in Boston a couple years ago now, I think it's about maybe even 3 years ago now, those experiments showed that Lyme, about 20% of the spirochetes on those Petri dishes and about 20% of the cyst would assume a persister form. All right. And what happens with persister forms is they basically are a form of the germ that goes into hibernation. It slows its metabolism way, way down. And when its metabolism is slowed way down, it no longer responds to the antibiotics, okay? And so by stopping antibiotics, they were able to show in those Petri dish experiments that the germ would wake back up and then start to respond to the antibiotics again. So one of the other things that can happen when you're pulsing 2 months off is during that time, those germs that might have moved into persisters move out of persisters as well too. Now those Petri dish experiments showed us that it's only 24 hours you need to be off of antibiotics on a Petri dish. Now keep in mind, we as humans cannot wash an antibiotic off the way that they wash them off in the Petri dish experiments. So you probably need longer than 24 hours to wake those germs back up. But I suspect within a few days of stopping antibiotics, those ones that have assumed persister forms are waking back up and being able to respond, okay? Now, what's interesting about that, in those Petri dish experiments, they said that they only had to have a person off, or the Petri dish had to be washed off the antibiotic for just 24 hours, and it would wake back up again, and then they would use the antibiotics again, and they found that they only had to do that 4 times. So being off for 24 hours, use the antibiotics for a brief period of time, then wash it off again, be off for 24 hours. They did that 4 times, and on those Petri dish experiments, they wiped out all of the Lyme, including the persisters, okay? Now, what's interesting about that is there is another researcher Dr. Zhang out of Hopkins, that's Zhang, who's been doing, he's taken his tuberculosis research lab and is now doing Lyme disease research looking at persister cells. And what he has said publicly, and I've heard some lectures from him, is that he finds in his experiments looking at antibiotic regimens that stand the best chance of getting rid of persisters, he's finding that pulsing is not the way to go. That it's a matter of having the right combination of antibiotics. Okay, so that suggests something different. All right, but one of the things I will do with my patients is I will try 2 month on, 2 month off regimens. Burrascano, the way he did it, it wasn't just 2 months off. He would treat so he was off long enough that he would get really sick, and to the point he couldn't take it anymore. Then he would go back on. And that works out to about 2 months off, okay? So just to kind of clarify that, all right? But that can give some benefit. I had a patient of mine that I treated for Lyme for about 3.5 years, about 2.5, 3 years actually, where we took care of a lot of her symptoms. We could not get her energy to shift. Her energy moved from 0 out of 10 up to about 2 out of 10, okay? And so we started doing this 2 month on, 2 month off regimen. And after the third round, her energy popped up to 70 to 80% of normal. And she went on to get pregnant, all right? So it can make a difference. Even if it's not a cure, it can make a big difference for people, okay? All right. Rita, thank you for that question. Hello, Kobe. Let's see. Symptom with unknown cause happens on 8-week cycle. Always every other new moon, not full. I experience a sudden loss of memory, followed by anxiety adjustment, despair, ups and downs for several weeks. Then I will start to feel like I have turned the corner and I'm over it. And then it repeats. Kobe, I wonder if there was a second part to your question that didn't come through. So let me I'll make a comment here. I don't know what your question is, but for some people with Lyme, their symptoms actually will worsen every 4 weeks. I haven't seen people on an 8-week cycle before, but every 4 weeks. And that 4 weeks we think is related to the germ replicating more on that 4-week cycle. There's more germ to kill, if you will, or more germ to stimulate the immune system into making inflammation cytokines that make you feel bad. I will also say, though, I have some people that report worsening on full moons. And I don't know why that happens, other than I think it does happen. So those are just my comments to that. I don't think I have a complete question from you here, so I'm not able to answer what your specific question was. All right. Thank you for that, Kobe. Hello, Marie. Again, let's see. Do you think bioresonance is a good way to treat Lyme and co-infections? If yes, what kind of bioresonance? So I really am not sure. I know that I have a number of patients that have used what are called Rife machines. Rife generates electromagnetic frequencies. A bioresonance machine generates electromagnetic frequencies. The idea with Rife is that you generate a frequency that vibrates the covering of the germ so that it eventually vibrates and bursts, okay? I see that people get help maybe about 40% of the time when they do rifing. My Food and Drug Administration here in the States will not let me prescribe these or recommend them. So I can't specifically do it, but people that come in and see me that have chosen to do this on their own report some benefit about 40% of the time. For bioresonance, I don't know. I haven't had people actually try it, but I throw it in that group of treatments that I would throw Rife machine treatments into. Okay? All right. Thanks, Marie. Hello, Patty. Let's see. I have difficulty speaking. People have difficulty understanding me, especially on the phone. I've been to 2 ENTs, and the second one said that my false vocal folds are hyper functioning. Everything else is normal. Have you had patients with difficulty speaking? And which organs do you think it is? So I have, but usually I'm thinking it's something neurologic. And the ones that would cause neurologic dysfunction that could result in speaking dysfunction would be Lyme, and Bartonella would be the two I would think of. Okay? All right. Good luck to you, Patty. Hello, Vicky. Let's see. I believe that I have Lyme encephalopathy. Don't have an LMG. I'm in a wheelchair. What should I do? Um, Hold on here just a minute, Vicky. That's a big question. So it all depends on what all of your symptoms are. Yeah, it's so I think what you're asking is how would you treat this? And to treat Lyme, I need a lot more information from you. So this is too big of a question to answer with that big of in this kind of a format. The one thing you might want to look at doing is well, I'll show you a couple of resources you could look at, but to give you, and I'll show, and then let me go ahead and do that. I can do a screen share here. Symptoms to figure out how to really tailor an approach for you. Okay. And so one way that I could do that is with this online consult where you actually set a visit up with me and I'd be glad to visit with you over the internet. Okay. Take a look here at this and how it works. Just realize that if you do want to try to make that kind of an appointment, that I cannot order test or prescription antibiotics for you unless you were to actually come out and see me and I do a physical exam on you. Okay, my medical board will not prefers they don't prescribe if I don't get to see you and examine you. All right, so that's one thing. The other thing you might want to take a look at is my ideas and how do you treat Lyme disease. All right, and this is my general approach, and that's in my treatment guideline here. Just because you have encephalopathy doesn't mean you necessarily need to use IV antibiotics. Orals might work, herbals might work, but take a look at the treatment steps that I have here, including part 1, sleep, part 2, diet, part 3, lowering inflammation with cytokine control, etc. I mean, just read through the whole thing here, okay? But to give you the best answer, I would look at setting up one of those online consults. Thank you for that question, Vicki. Hello, Kate. Let's see. IgG test result. IgM 18 positive, 34 positive, 31 indeterminate, 41 indeterminate, IgG 41 positive. Let's see. Quest IgG 4166. Results CDC and IgG negative. What is your impression of my test results? Okay. So, Kate, first of all, again, testing is only one part of considering whether you might have Lyme. I would want to consider them also in considering what your symptoms tell me to, okay? And whether you have risk of having had a tick bite or getting Lyme as well, all right? So having said that, though, when we look at a Western blot, IgG, when they do their Western blot, are looking to see if you have antibodies against 12 proteins found on the covering of the germ. We identify those proteins by what they weigh. So there's a protein on the covering of the Lyme germ that weighs 18 kilodaltons. That's band 18, okay? And one that weighs 34 kilodaltons, for instance, okay? Now, IgG in their methodology says that we should focus on 6 of those 12 proteins. And those 6 are the protein 23-25, 31, 34, 39, 41, and 8393. And if you have antibodies against 2 of those proteins, then that means you have a positive test, okay? Now, the reason we focus on those 6 is we want to make sure that if there are antibodies stuck on your Lyme proteins, that they were really made against Lyme, all right? Sounds reasonable. So, things like the Epstein-Barr virus, which is the monovirus, for instance, when your immune system makes antibodies against it, sometimes they'll cross-attach to the Lyme proteins, okay? But it is rare that they cross-attach to those 6 that I just told you about. And it's very rare that they would cross-attach to 2, okay? Now, let me throw a little twist in this. I think 18 is also one of those proteins, even though IGeneX does not. Okay. So I actually would interpret your 1834 as being positive based on the fact that I look at 7 of those proteins, even though IGeneX looks at 6. Okay. In fact, in Europe, they consider the 18 actually. All right. Secondly, that 31 indeterminate and 41 indeterminate either mean the indeterminates there mean they're either making antibodies, but at an amount barely being detected. They can't quite tell if they're really there or not. Okay. Or you've got some dirt that showed up on the test strip. Now, given that 18 is positive, given 34 is positive, I would probably think that 31, 41 probably are antibodies, but most likely just being weakly expressed. Now, I would feel much stronger about saying that if I knew what all your symptoms told me as well, too, okay? So with an 1834, I probably would call that a positive test, but I'd even feel stronger about saying that if you had a lot of Lyme symptoms to go along with it, too, okay? That's my impression of that, all right? Now, I want to talk about IgMs being positive. So when we test for antibodies in Lyme by doing a Western blot, we look at IgM and IgG antibodies, okay? IgM antibodies are the antibody family you develop when you first get an infection, and that's in any infection. That could be your throat infection, that could be virus infections. It's always IgM antibodies you develop first, all right? And then by about 6 weeks to 3 months, generally in most infections, they're going to go away, and they're going to get replaced by IgG antibodies, all right? And once you develop IgGs, they are the memory of the immune system. They're not supposed to ever go away. Now, here's the wild thing, is that in Lyme, even though IgMs are supposed to go away by 6 weeks to 3 months, about 80% of the time that I diagnose Lyme, and somebody I think has had it for a year or more, they're still making the IgM antibodies. And that is an observation I have, and that's an observation that most of my colleagues that treat Lyme disease have too, okay? Now, the infectious disease doctors want to call that all a false positive. They're going to say, you've been sick over a year, or you've been sick over 6 months, they shouldn't be there anymore. That's a false positive because Lyme's not behaving the way every other infection does, all right? So there's a reason we think that happens, and it's partly due to a phenomenon called epitope switching, which also goes by the name antigenic variation. So either epitope switching, also called antigenic variation. And what happens is any germ covering is a layer of fat into which all these proteins are stuck, okay? And each one of those proteins, like the 18 weight proteins, all look different than the 34 weight proteins look, for instance, okay? And so in Lyme, we know from science that those proteins can bury themselves in fat and pop back out. All right. So what the germ looks like is always changing. So what we theorize then is that the immune system gets tricked into thinking it's seeing a new infection because the germ is always looking new. So the immune system responds by making the new infection antibodies. Okay. So that's one explanation for why people keep making IgMs. But the reason I raised the point here is IgMs being positive, even at 3 months or 6 months beyond when you got sick, is what happens in Lyme about 80% of the time. And it's not a false positive, okay? All right. Thanks for that question, Kate. Hello, Jennifer. Let's see. Are you of the school of thought that believes that internal mold growth can lead to mycotoxins being released inside the body, which in turn complicates treating Lyme and co-infections? If so, what do you think of mycotoxin uracil? And lastly, how do you feel about internal mold propagation? All right. So yes, I am of that school of thought, but I want to clarify what internal means. Okay. So hold on, I got to take a glass of water here. Okay. So when you have Lyme disease, the reason you feel bad is that your immune system, in trying to get rid of the germs, the white blood cells make a group of chemicals called cytokines. And those cytokines are good and bad. On the good side, they turn the white blood cells on. They cause more white blood cells to be made. They draw them to the infection, okay? But eventually, if the immune system doesn't do a good job getting rid of Lyme, it makes too many cytokines. And too many cytokines give you a hard time thinking, make you hurt all over, give you fatigue, etc. Everything we call a Lyme symptom, okay? All right, now, there's other things that trigger cytokines. And one of those is mold toxins, or toxins of any kind. So when your immune system sees a mold toxin, it will behave by trying to get rid of it too, and it will make cytokines. So sometimes mold toxicity illness, which is the inability to get mold toxins out of you, can look identical to Lyme disease, okay? All right. So there's a theory promoted and with some science behind it and developed by a physician named Richie Shoemaker out on the East Coast, out in Pocomoke, Maryland, out of the Chesapeake Bay, where he was able to show that genetically 25% of us have a predisposition where we are not able to remove mold toxins once they get in us, okay? So one way mold toxins can get in us is we can breathe them in, drink them in, or eat them in from the environment around us. And once they get in us, they're supposed to be, our immune system, if it functions correctly, is supposed to tag those toxins for removal and break them down. And then they get peed out and pooped out, okay? But if your immune system isn't functioning correctly, and 25% of people it doesn't apparently, those toxins do not get tagged correctly. They go to the liver as a fat toxin. The liver is unable to transform them into a water-based toxin. They get moved out into the intestines, and if they were correctly turned into a water-based toxin, they get mixed in our poop and we poop them out. But because they're fat-based toxins, that doesn't happen. What happens is they get reabsorbed again, and they keep recirculating, okay? And so they keep triggering cytokines, which is why you feel sick, okay? Now, it is also possible that when you have or live in a mold environment, that you can breathe in those mold spores or you can eat in those mold spores, and they can then start to colonize you. They can live in you, okay? But where they live is in your sinus passages or even in the sinuses themselves, or they can live in the intestinal tract. They do not literally get in your bloodstream, for instance, the mold spores themselves, okay? So you can have small amounts of mold colonizing, living in the mucus linings of your sinuses or sinus passages, or you could have them in the intestinal tract where, guess what they produce? Mold toxins, okay? So yeah, it's possible. That is a possibility. So the way that I like to figure if somebody has mold toxicity out, one of the things I will do is I like doing the real-time urine test. Real-time has the ability to see if you're peeing out excessive amounts of unbroken down toxins of 4 different families. One family is called gliotoxin, which also can come from yeast, but can come from mold in wet buildings. Trichosethine, which is black mold toxin. Something called ochratoxin, another one called aflatoxin, okay? So it can look for 4 different families. Now, my approach is to try to bind those toxins up. If somebody's no longer living in an environment where they're being exposed to most toxins, and we put you on a binder like cholestyramine that will bind them up in the intestines and pull them out, or charcoal or bentonite clay, and we do that for a couple months, we should see somebody starting to get better if they have a mold toxicity issue. If they don't get better, I'm going to go back and retest my urine mycotoxin test. And if the urine mycotoxins are still elevated, then I'm going to start wondering, is this a person who is colonized, that has mold living in their sinuses or living in their intestines? Okay, now, we don't have a great test for this, all right? There just isn't a good way of testing for it. So you have to use your clinical suspicion. But if I'm like 2 months, maybe even 4 months into binders, and I've got somebody that still is just pouring out, peeing out massive amounts of mold toxins, I'm going to start treating the sinus passages in the intestines for mold colonization. And the way I'm going to do that is with a nose spray of an antifungal like either nystatin, itraconazole, or amphotericin. And I'm also going to put people on an oral agent of itraconazole. All right. So that's how I go about doing this. So yeah, I am of that school, and I have seen benefits by doing that. Okay. Likewise, if you've got somebody that gets better with this approach, and then they get worse again, always go back and relook at their living environment. It is hard to detect those mold toxins sometimes, and sometimes people are just getting re-exposed to, okay? It's really a complicated area to deal with if you happen to be a person who has this problem. All right. All right. I'm going to just show you a quick video that you can get more information about this too, or article I've written that you can get more information. So I can do a quick screen share here. We'll look at the chapter on, let's go to the detoxification chapter. All right, so here's my article on mold and Lyme toxin illness, where I talk about the various binders you would use to pull those toxins out. I talk about real-time testing. I talk about a variety of things, okay? But take a look at that article. That's the one I've written about this issue. All right. Hello, let's see. Hello, Anne. Let's see. Hi, Dr. Ross. Had 4 rounds of doxy since I got sick in September 2016. Nothing for cyst, no other herbal antibiotics. My Lyme MD has just prescribed Zithromax, 250 milligrams pulsing, 5 days on, 10 off, repeat. My Lyme ND has advised me to start grapefruit seed extract. I know you advise against pulsing Zithromax. What? There is a second part here. Let's see if I can find it here, Anne. Let's see. What other antibiotics should I request? Could you please comment on effectiveness of grapefruit seed extract versus antibiotics for cyst Lyme? Thanks for giving me so free of your time and expertise. Forever grateful. You're welcome, Anne. So I'd like, in terms of getting rid of the cyst form of Lyme, the 4 things I will, well, 5 things, 6. 2 are Banderol cemento. Many of you may be familiar with those 2 herbs as herbs that I recommend to treat Lyme that work as well as prescription antibiotics, I find. They work about 85 to 90% of the time. Those 2 herbs do a great job breaking down cyst Lyme, biofilm, intracellular, and spirochete Lyme. And sometimes if I've got somebody that I'm trying to treat and I run out of other options to treat the cyst, even if I'm going to have on prescription antibiotics, I might use Banderol cemento combined together to pick up the cyst form of the germ. Okay, so 1 is Banderol cemento. Grapefruit seed extract is another great choice. I usually use it as 250 milligrams twice a day. It's very strong anti-cyst too. The strongest so I would give it a 90% potency. I would give a Banderol cemento a 90% potency. The most potent, though, would be a tinidazole or a metronidazole. And I'd give those 100% potency. The problem with both of those is they're extremely toxic antibiotics and often very hard to tolerate. They have many side effects, and I don't think we gain that much by using them. So my preference still is grapefruit seed extract, okay? I also sometimes will use rifampin as a cyst buster, and I'd give it a potency of like 80%, okay? So I put grapefruit seed extract above that, all right? Okay. Now, in terms of Zithromax, the problem I have with pulsing Zithromax is when you're pulsing, you want to have a period. The idea behind pulsing is to be off an antibiotic so that you decrease the toxic effect to your organs, like your liver and kidney, okay? The other reason to be off is so that the germ that might have moved into persister forms, like I described earlier, starts to regrow again, all right? But the problem with Zithromax is it literally takes 7 days of you being off of the antibiotic before it gets completely out of your system, all right? It's got a long, what we call elimination half-life. So effectively, during the time you're off, you never get rid of it. So you're not getting the benefits of pulsing, basically. So why pulse, all right? Secondly, I don't like that dose they're using, 250 milligrams. That's a really low dose. Zithromax, generally for Lyme in adults, is a weak antibiotic. It will treat intracellular Lyme and it will treat spirochete Lyme, but it is, of all the things we can use, it's probably one of the weakest things we can use from a prescription standpoint. In a kid, I think it works great, but in adults, I just don't find it to be that effective. What would be, and so therefore, if you're going to do it, I would prefer 500 milligrams daily, okay? But if you want to stay in that same family, which are the antibiotic family is called the macrolides, they're the erythromycin-like medicine. They also are called macrolides. One of the better members of that family would be Biaxin, also called clarithromycin, and that's 500 milligrams 2 times a day. Now that antibiotic, you can't pulse because it comes out of your system fast, okay? And in fact, that one, you could do it as a 5-day on, 5-day off. You could do it 4 days on, 3 days off. But if your doctors are wanting to work with a macrolide, the one to use if you're going to pulse is the Biaxin, not Zithromax. I don't understand the rationale of my colleagues when they give you an antibiotic to pulse that never comes out of your system. So anyhow, there you go. That's my commentary on that. All right. Good luck to you, man. Thanks for that question. Hello, Rhonda. Let's see. Hi, Dr. Ross. My Lyme disease took 4 years to diagnose, and as a result, I have been told I will never completely eliminate from my body, and I need to look after myself. I have recently been diagnosed with lymphatic colitis. What is your opinion on the use of steroids for patients in my situation? Boy, that's a hard decision. So the problem with steroids in general when you have Lyme is that they suppress the immune system, which then allows Lyme to get more active, okay? For lymphatic colitis, this means you've got a bunch of lymphocyte white blood cells that are in your lining of your intestines, causing inflammation, giving you watery diarrhea, cramping, etc. And a treatment for that can be steroids. You might also want to see if your doctor would try to use some other ways of decreasing this immune system reaction. And you could try it to see if it works. One would be to do something called low-dose naltrexone. Naltrexone is a narcotic blocker that blocks a group of receptors in our bodies called endorphins. And endorphins are our body's natural system for pain regulation, but they also regulate the immune system, okay? And so what happens with low-dose naltrexone is if you perform a temporary blockade of the endorphin receptors, the brain doesn't like that and sends out a bunch of signals to the endorphin-producing cells in the body, and it tells them, make more endorphins, and they do. And so that as the naltrexone wears away, those endorphin receptors then get flooded with all kinds of endorphins, which has the effect of turning your immune system off of attacking you and your intestine lining, for instance, okay? Now, if you're going to do it, I would give it a 3-month trial. You start at 1.5 milligrams 1 time a day for 2 weeks, then you go up to 3 milligrams 1 time a day for 2 weeks, then you go up to 4.5 milligrams 1 time a day, okay? That would be one thing. The other thing I would look at is, ask the question is, why has your immune system responded and moved into your intestines so strongly like this? So I would wonder what else is tickling your intestines. Maybe it's Lyme. Maybe you got a parasite infection in there. Maybe you got a bacteria infection. Maybe you got yeast overgrowth. So I would take care of making sure you don't have yeast overgrowth and treating that, okay? And I would also, you might consider a round of treating for parasites like I talked about earlier, even though you have cultures that are negative, okay? So let me show you where you can look at all this stuff, okay? Because I just gave you a number of ideas to consider. So let me turn my screen sharing back on here. How do you treat them? Take a look at my infection treatment plans section in the Treat Lyme book. And kills parasites, a brief guide. Take a look at this article, okay? We'll talk about what you can do about that, all right? All right. Then let's see, in terms of yeast, I think I already showed you that earlier. Well, actually, in terms of regulating the immune system with low-dose naltrexone, go to my immune system chapter and take a look at this article called on low-dose naltrexone, okay? Take a look at that. You'll see the ins and outs of low-dose naltrexone, okay? All right, and then in terms of yeast, I showed you this chapter earlier, but click on my yeast link here, and that'll get you to the yeast chapter where you can read articles on figuring out if you have too many yeast, also on what do you do to treat too many yeast too, okay? Hello, Lane. Hold on here, everyone. I gotta loosen up one of my shoes. It suddenly is just feeling overly tight. Hold on here a second. All right, let's see. Any experience with Pectisol C as a detox supplement? So Pectisol uses pectin, which is a fibrous compound that can come from citrus and apples, okay? And it is a soluble fiber that has the ability to bind up toxins, specifically mold and even Lyme toxins. I use another product, not this one specifically. I use something called modified citrus pectin by Thorne, but it's the same idea. And I do find it useful as a means of binding toxins. If you were to do it, I'd do it as one scoop a couple times a day. Okay? All right. Good luck to you. Thanks for the question, Lynn. Hello, and let's see here. My MCV is on the high side, 96, so I'm not able to absorb B12 to help with my energy. How do I fix this? So your MCV can be elevated actually and due to either insufficiency of B12 or folate actually. So make sure that your provider has looked to make sure you have adequate folate in you too, okay? And then, yeah, I mean, those would just be my common thoughts about this. In terms of if it really is a B12 absorption problem, make sure you don't have too many yeast. If they're there, they're going to be decreasing absorption of things too. Okay? Those are my thoughts there. All right. Thanks for that question. Hello, Lauren. Hold on, everyone. I've got to also do one more thing here. I've got to get some airflow here in my office, and I'm going to open the door up. All right. I'm sitting here under the lights that I use so that you guys can see me, and I'm just starting to cook. So I happen to have my window open so I can get airflow, but now I have to open my door up to get that airflow. So there. Now I'm starting to feel like I'm cooling down. That's good. All right. Hello, Lauren. Let's see. Good evening. Is it possible to put chronic Lyme into remission solely through improving the immune system, or is it always necessary to use antimicrobials, antibiotics in conjunction? My quality of life has been significantly worse during treatment, and I worry about doing more harm than good. Thanks. So, it's a good question. When you're treating Lyme, you're always weighing out risk and benefits. Okay, so there are risk in using antibiotics, and those antibiotics either making you feel poorly, causing Herx reactions, and sometimes even knocking down good bacteria in your intestines. We're starting to have more and more information coming out showing us that when you alter the good bacteria makeup of your intestines, that can lead to problems many years down the road with how your immune system functions, for instance, okay? So those are the risk side, okay? But there's also risk of not getting your germs knocked out. And if you don't knock the germs out, then you're going to stay sick because they're still there, okay? Now, we never get rid of Lyme completely if you've had it for a year or more. But what the antibiotics do is they do a good job of killing the germs, okay? Now, is it possible to turn your immune system on in a way that it can put Lyme into remission? Yeah. And the way to do that would be with things like transfer factors, transfer factor L+, for instance, made by Research Nutritionals. One pill twice a day might do that. Being on mushrooms that actually turn on your immune system might help with that. Low-dose naltrexone might help with that. But what I see in reality is that those probably do a better job of helping treatment, and maybe after you get better to a point of actually helping to keep you in remission. But if you're really symptomatic from Lyme, I think it is best to actually go after the infection and kill it. That's just what I've seen in my practice, okay? So, but again, you're always weighing out risk and benefits there, all right? All right. I have an article on transfer factors if you're wondering what they are too. You can take a look at that in the immune system chapter, okay? All right. Thanks for that question, Lauren. Let's see. Kate, I think we answered that one earlier for you. Hello, Jennifer. I see you talk about a lot of yeast in the intestines. What about systemic yeast? Does it get into the blood? How do you treat it and how to prevent it from coming back? Thanks. I've been really enjoying your talks. You're welcome. So, when people talk about systemic yeast, it's kind of a weird term, actually, because people throw it around, but I don't think they really, a lot of people say they have systemic yeast. I don't think really understand fully what they're saying by that, okay? So systemic means it is living all over your body. It somehow got into the bloodstream. It is now living in your brain. It's living in your muscles. It's in your liver. Okay, that's what systemic means. It's throughout your body, all right? All right. And that, yes, that is possible, but you're going to be really sick. I mean, you're going to be sicker than people with Lyme can be, okay? So the people we really worry about that in are more people that have like cancer and they're on chemotherapy that suppresses their immune system, or people with HIV/AIDS, it's possible. And the way you know you have it is if you do a blood test and you actually see it grow in the blood culture, okay? And they are sick. They are on death's doorstep, okay? But most people, 99% of people that have yeast and Lyme, probably even 99.99% of people, feel bad from yeast, not from it actually living in their blood and populating their full body, but they have systemic effects of having yeast in their intestines, okay? So notice the word I said systemic effects rather than being systemically around the body, all right? So when you have too many yeast in your intestines, there's a couple things that happens. One is those yeast release a toxin called gliotoxin that gets absorbed into your bloodstream. That toxin can interact with your skin, giving you acne, and that toxin also can make it so you have more brain confusion, okay? Can give neurologic dysfunction, all right? The other thing that yeast in your intestine do is they trigger cytokine release by the immune cells that line your intestines. Those cytokines get into your bloodstream and they reenact all your Lyme symptoms, okay? So cytokines can make you feel poor, okay? The other thing that too many yeast living in your intestines do is they trigger cells, immune cells that line the intestines called mast cells to release histamines, and you get all the histamine reaction too. So systemic yeast, 99.999% of the time in Lyme, means you're having systemic effects of yeast living in the intestines, all right? Not that you're having yeast living in your bloodstream and living in your organs, okay? All right, hope that clarifies that for you. Thanks, Jennifer. Hello, Jennifer. Again, let's see. I have Lyme, Bart, and Ehrlichia on doxy, rifampin, alinea, baluchi, and curcumin. My doctor suggested I get curcumin or ozone IV to help my healing. Do you think this would be worthwhile? It's interesting. They do two different things. I'm not sure why he's recommending both of them as a similar idea. So curcumin is is an herb. It comes to us, it's a component of turmeric, the Indian seasoning turmeric. And it has strong anti-inflammatory properties. It gets inside white blood cells and turns down their production of cytokines. And you've heard me mention cytokines a number of times tonight. That's why you feel bad in Lyme, okay? Giving it IV may have a stronger effect than doing it orally. Okay? Ozone, on the other hand, is an oxidizing agent. And oxidizing agents damage membranes and maybe even our own cell membranes, but they also damage the germ membranes and damage the germ DNA, effectively killing your germs. Okay, now germs don't have antioxidants, so they cannot protect themselves from the ozone. Our cells, we make antioxidants, which in theory should protect us from the harmful effects of ozone. The trouble is, no one's done long-term studies to know what happens when you repeatedly give yourself IV ozone. Does it start damaging your cells? Does it start damaging your DNA? I think maybe for an acute times, I think like maybe 2 to 4 treatments as a germ killer, it might be safe to do. But for people that are looking at this as one of the major ways they're going to kill their Lyme and do it repeatedly, I have concerns about that. All right. So those are my thoughts. So they are not equivalent treatments. I'm wondering why your practitioner is recommending them do one or the other. They do two different things, okay? All right. Thank you for that question. Hello, Jill. Let's see. Hi, Dr. Ross. Every 3 to 4 weeks, I experience a terrible frontal headache with scalp sensitivity, almost like sunburn sensation. Does that sound like Lyme or possibly a co-infection? The headaches usually last for 3 days. So headaches in the front of the head sometimes mean babesia, but babesia headaches usually are going to be pretty regular, like daily, maybe every other day. They're not going to have this pattern of every 3 to 4 weeks, okay? Lyme, on the other hand, has a pattern of triggering some worsening about every 3 to 4 weeks. I'm wondering if it's more of a Lyme-related headache, okay? Now, I would still look at all the symptoms that suggest babesia. Keep in mind that babesia testing is not the greatest. We have an estimated 15 to 20 strains of babesia. We can only test for 2. And so when you try to figure out if you have babesia, I like to just look at what the symptoms are that suggest babesia. And those symptoms can be air hunger, which is a feeling you can't get enough air from time to time, drenching night sweats, the kind of sweats where you soak your bed. Sometimes babesia will give people repeat deja vu experiences. So people sometimes have daily deja vu or once a week deja vu. I find it to be the most interesting babesia symptom, actually. And you'll see that get better, actually. As you treat the babesia, those deja vu symptoms will start to go away. It's one of the ways that I track my treatments when somebody actually has that as a symptom. Babesia can give racing and skipping of the heart. Sometimes it can make it so you feel like you're going to pass out periodically. Babesia also can give headaches in front of the head, okay? But not all front of the head headaches are necessarily from babesia. So if you happen to have a lot of those babesia symptoms I just mentioned, you might want to treat that. That might help. But that 3 to 4 week cycling is something we see that's more peculiar to Lyme, actually, okay? All right, those are my thoughts. Thanks for that question, Jill. Let's see. Hi, Dr. Ross. How do grains and dairy affect the growth of Lyme? How long does one have to stay on a paleo diet? Is there a recommended time frame or just until symptom-free? Thanks. Okay. So many of you may know that I have a recommended diet that is a paleo diet called the Mito Food Plan. And it's a diet that's high in protein, vegetables as your carb and fiber source, and also in high quality fats, okay? The reason I recommend that diet is that it has a lower chance of triggering too many yeast when you're on antibiotics, okay? That's one reason. Second reason I recommend that diet is that it supports your energy factories in your cells called mitochondria. And many people in Lyme, from having Lyme and their immune system responding and making too many oxidizing agents, their membranes that make up the mitochondria, the fat membranes that make up the mitochondria, get injured. And part of the reason they have fatigue is they have sluggish energy generation from that mitochondria dysfunction. And there's ways to fix the mitochondria, but one of the most basic ways is to eat a diet healthy for mitochondria function. And that happens to be a paleo type food diet. Okay, so that's why I recommend it. Now, in terms of Lyme, grains and dairy do not necessarily have any effect on Lyme. Okay, but some people with dairy get dairy allergies, for instance, so they may be sensitive to dairy. Or some people, and the reason I don't recommend grains, again, is that's a carbohydrate or food source for yeast. But I haven't seen any studies that say Lyme itself, the Lyme infection, does any worse on that, okay? All right. So if you're interested in looking at my diet recommendations, and there's a bunch of resources you can download from on my site about this and watch some videos that I've done before too. I'm just going to do a quick screen share and show you how you can find that. Or a chapter called Free Reads. And take a look at the article called The Best Brain, Inflammation, Pain, Energy, and Detox Diet Ever. I think I got a little carried away on that title, but this is the Mito Food Plan article, okay? And I got the Mito Food Plan, comes to me through a group called the Institute for Functional Medicine. These are their materials, but as long as I'm using them to educate people, they let me post them on the website. All right. So take a look here. You'll see I've got things to download. I even have a video about how do you figure out how many calories you're supposed to have, etc. But take a look at this. It's kind of a do-it-yourself paleo guide. Okay. All right. Let me go back here. Hello, Janie. Let's see. When I am concentrating or trying to retrieve memory, my head is hurting globally. Previously had over 40 brain lesions. Should I be concerned? Test. So Janie, I'm not sure specifically what head pain and concentration while concentrating means. But if you've had a decline in how you're doing overall, and you're getting more pain, one thing you might want to do is go back and relook at what's happening with your brain lesions, okay, by doing another image, okay? All right. Thanks for that question. Hello, Kobe. Let's see. Have you found that tinidazole will penetrate biofilm and also kill all 3 forms of Lyme? All right. So there were some petri dish experiments done about 5 or 6 years ago, maybe 4 years ago, by a researcher named Eva Choppy, and that her last name is spelled S-A-P-I. And what she was doing is she was growing Lyme on petri dishes, and then exposing them to various antibiotics and also the herb Banderol cemento. Okay. And so actually, these are 5 or 6 years ago they were published. So what she found is that the herb Banderol and the herb cemento did a great job of killing all 3 forms of Lyme, and collectively, when you used the 2 together, got rid of 100% of biofilm. Okay. She also then looked at doxycycline, amoxicillin, metronidazole, tinidazole, doxycycline, and she found that all of those prescription antibiotics to a degree break down biofilms, but some better than others, okay? And the one that did the strongest was tinidazole, and in her experiments, it broke down 95% of biofilm. And probably did a good job treating cyst Lyme, maybe spirochete Lyme. It's hard to say, but definitely biofilm and cyst Lyme, okay? So that's what I tend to use it for. Is if I'm wanting to add something to deal with biofilm and treat cyst, that's the one I'm going to go for. All right? Thanks for the question, Kobe. Hello, Catherine. Let's see. Do you think it would make sense to pulse herbs once you are in remission, assuming you have already dealt with co-infections and you are planning on stopping treatment? So, Catherine, yeah, I mean, I think pulsing antibiotics once you've dealt with your Bartonella, Babesia, even Ehrlichia anaplasma, I think is a reasonable way to go. Okay. And if you're using it kind of to wrap up your treatment as a way of starting to keep you in remission, I think it sounds like a reasonable approach to do. All right. Thanks for that question. Hello, Tina. Let's see. Which supplements do you have that I could use for late stage Lyme arthritis? All right. So by late stage Lyme arthritis, I think you mean pain in your joints, maybe with or without inflammation. All right. So one thing you want to do is get the inflammation down. And the way to do that is to try the curcumin that I recommend, and which basically decreases the inflammatory cytokines and also can lower inflammatory prostaglandins too, which can occur in your joints as well. And that would be to do the Thorne Mariva 500, 1 pill 3 times a day. I prefer that as my curcumin source because Thorne microscopically wraps their curcumin in fat to increase its absorption, okay? So 1 pill 3 times a day, all right? The other thing I would consider adding as a good anti-inflammatory is brown seaweed, also called Ecklonia cava, and that's Ecklonia, and then cava, Cava. It's also brown seaweed. It's a very strong antioxidant, and there have been numerous rheumatology studies showing that it can help with joint pain. Okay, so that's 2 pills twice a day on that, and the company that makes that is Allergy Research, and their product is called FibroBoost. Okay, so FibroBoost is Ecklonia cava, 2 pills twice a day. Couple that with Mariva 500, 1 pill 3 times a day. All right. Finally, when you get a lot of joint pain in Lyme, one of the things that could have happened is that Lyme can make enzymes that can break down your cartilage. So in your joints, where 2 bones come together, the surfaces of those bones are covered by a layer of cartilage. And cartilage is smooth, so it allows your bones to glide over each other easily. It's also a little bit spongier than bone it covers, so it kind of acts as a shock absorber, okay? Now, if you have worn down that cartilage, and Lyme sometimes makes that more possible or easily occurring, you're going to wind up getting bone rubbing on bone. And when bone rubs on bone, it creates inflammation, all right? So you might try also rebuilding the cartilage. And one of the things that can help with that is to do glucosamine sulfate as a 500 milligram pill. And I would do 1 pill 3 times a day. If you're going to give it a try, give it a 3-month trial. You should have benefit by 3 months. If you don't, then it's just not going to work. I find it helpful about 75 to 85% of the time. And the product I like for that is a Thorne product called Mariva 500. Is a Thorne product. Their glucosamine sulfate is a 500 milligram pill. Okay. Now, do a 500 milligram pill. There are some companies out there that make a 1500 milligram 1 time a day variety. It does not work as well as taking it 500 milligrams 3 times a day. Okay, so just be aware of that too. All right. Good luck to you, Tina. All right. So some of you may be wondering. I'm going to do a quick screen share here. Products do I actually use in my practice? All right. So you can take a look here. This is my supplement store, Marty Ross MD Supplements. This is where my patients here at my practice, the Healing Arts Partnership in Seattle, this is where they get their supplements, all right? We use this as our supplement site here in the store or in the clinic, and also this is where people can reorder. So if you're wondering what curcumin products I might have, what you can do, and what brands I recommend, type in curcumin. And you'll see a variety of products, including this Mariva 500 I was just talking about, okay? If you're just wondering what are the manufacturers that I like, which ones do I think have the best chance of working in the world of supplements, look and see what I carry, okay? So for instance, I carry Research Nutritionals. I find that they're offering one of the most innovative lines of supplements that can help with the symptoms of Lyme disease, okay? So I carry, I think, just about everything that they have, I carry now. Maybe 1 or 2 that I need to still add here. But so anyhow, if you're wondering when I use a generic description of something, what it is, what's the actual product I recommend. My Treat Lyme book, I don't give you specific product names because the Food and Drug Administration actually precludes me from doing that unless I have I have high quality experiments, if you will, that have been done on humans showing that they work. And most supplements don't have that degree of scientific proof. So because of that, I don't put the product name. I can still talk about generics. The reason I carry a supplement store is that there's a lot of variation in supplement quality out there. Most companies or most supplement stores that you go to are carrying products that when you pull them off the shelf and you look to see if they have the actual ingredients, they may not, or they're choosing lower cost ingredients that are not that active and effective. So I've tried to choose my products based on companies with a track record of making good quality, okay? Secondly, companies that tend not to put a lot of artificial fillers in that might harm a person with Lyme disease, all right? So be careful. If you're spending on other brands and they're cheaper, that may be good for your pocketbook, but I got to tell you, they may not work. or they may hurt you actually. Okay, so be careful with your supplements. All right. All right. Let's see here. Hello, Deborah. Let's see. My lymph tends to be stagnant. Any suggestions besides lymph massage? Actually, I don't have any other suggestions for you. All right. Lymphatic massage is what I would look at doing too. All right. Hello, Linda. Let's see. My daughter's doctor has recently discovered that her recovery from Bartonella has been hampered by mercury toxicity, primarily from thimerosal in vaccines. Have you had patients with mercury poisoning or other heavy metals? And if so, what type of chelation have you recommended? So, generally, I'm going to start thinking of looking for heavy metal toxicity if I'm about 6 to 9 months into treatment and somebody's not getting much better. It's one of a variety of things I might start looking for, okay? Because for most people, even if they actually do have elevations of mercury or lead or other toxins, I generally don't find much benefit from removing them. I just want to tell you, okay? And I do chelation in my practice, but in terms of something that's going to give you the big bang, even though your doctor thinks it may be the big thing that's holding the treatment back, I don't know if it will be or not. I would still remove it if you're into treatment and things aren't working. You might consider doing it, okay? What do I use to chelate mercury? I like using something called DMSA. It's a medicine that's an oral agent that has to be made by a compounding pharmacy. I think it does a nice job. Yeah, that's what I would recommend. Okay. All right. Good luck to you, Linda. Hello, Kate. Let's see. Can Lyme cause gut problems and acid reflux? So Lyme can give some GI dysfunction. So primarily the main reason that it would do that, or the reason how it would do that, is that Lyme can infect the nerves that cause the intestines to work correctly. In fact, the largest part of our nervous system outside of the brain and the spinal cord is the intestinal system. Okay, so the intestines have a lot of innervation, and those nerves primarily, one of the big things they do is they cause muscles to contract, pushing things through the intestines correctly. Okay, so if you have Lyme or if you have Bartonella, you might have some neurologic dysfunction, giving you a lot of muscle cramping, maybe constipation, maybe some GI dysfunction that way. Okay. However, I haven't seen it manifest as reflux before, right? So I don't think that it's going to give you reflux. I haven't seen that to occur that way, right? Some of the antibiotics you take can sometimes bring on reflux, though. Nice treatment I like using for reflux is to have people chew licorice tablets. There's a form of licorice called deglycerated licorice, and it's herbal medicinal licorice that has had a chemical group removed called the glycyrrhiza group. Glycyrrhiza on licorice can cause blood pressure to become elevated, so that chemical is removed. If you chew licorice in tablet form, your spit interacts with chemicals in it to form a microscopic gelatinous coat, if you will, of your food pipe and your stomach, and it can heal the lining. You can protect it from that acid reflux and get things working correctly again. You will want to chew it as a 300 to 320 milligram pill, and an adult chew 2 pills before meals 3 times a day. So that might be a solution for you as well, too. All right. Thank you for that question, Kate. Hello, Patty. Let's see. How does Artemisinin work if you only take it 3 days of every 14 days, but the half-life is about 2 to 5 hours? Thank you for your help. Okay. So Artemisinin, everyone, is Chinese wormwood, and it's useful for killing babesia, right? It's also useful for killing malaria. And in fact, the World Health Organization recognizes it as one of their frontline treatments for malaria. There's a problem with artemisinin in that after you've been on it for a few days, your intestines start to develop an enzyme that deactivates it. And so it loses its effectiveness, okay? So what I will do is I will use it the way the Chinese have found helpful in treating malaria, and that is to use it at super high doses for 3 days. So you get a massive kill of your babesia, and then you come off of it to let that enzyme that has developed in the intestines go away. Now, it seems if you're using it at high enough doses, Patty, I know it's got a short half-life, and I know babesia can replicate quickly, but my observation has been that I see people get better when I do it 3 days on, 14 days off. In an adult, I try to work up to 500 milligrams 3 times a day. That's a big dose, okay? When you get up to that level, often people are going to have lower energy beginning about the 2nd day through the 5th day. They might get lots of sweats and lower energy on the days that they take it through the 5th day, okay? So they take it day 1, 2, 3, and day 4 and day 5. They may still have extra symptoms going on as well, too. And yes, it does have a short half-life, but I have found it very helpful using it that way, okay? All right. And it's based upon what the Chinese are doing for malaria treatment, okay? I usually will start people the first round at 300 milligrams 3 times a day for the 3 days on. If they tolerate that well, they don't get clobbered too hard, then I'll go to the 400 milligrams 3 times a day for 3 days on, 11 days off. And again, if not clobbered too hard, then I'm going to go to the 11 days, to the 500 milligrams 3 times a day for 3 days on, 11 days off, okay? You do that for about 4 or 5 months, and often that's enough. Now, the Artemisinin, I got to let you know, for East Coast babesia, it seems not to be working as well these days. So just keep that one in mind as well, too. Okay? All right. Good luck to you. Hello, Will. Let's see. When you have a new patient confirmed for Lyme and various co-infections in general, what is your frequency of contact? Schedule of appointments. After 7 months of a treatment and limited progress, my daughter has only seen her doctor twice. What would your schedule be? So what I do is I like to see a person initially for about an hour and a half first visit, okay, where I can learn a lot of things. Often in kids, I don't need to use that full hour and a half, and that hour and a half often isn't enough. So, I mean, I schedule for an hour and a half, but sometimes that becomes a 2 to even 2.5 hour visit sometimes, okay? And then I do a follow-up visit 1 month later, often another one a month after that. And as long as things are going well, I might start switching out to every 2 months, okay? Now, my visits can occur different ways. The first one always has to be an in-person visit, because if I'm going to prescribe, I have to physically examine somebody, okay? The follow-up visits can be by phone, or I will do video visits over the internet too. So they don't have to be in office. Optimally, I would love to see somebody in person at least twice a year, but a lot of Lyme, you don't necessarily need to see a person to figure out what's going on. It's more about your symptoms, okay? So my visit, when I say I have visits at monthly intervals, that to me means either a phone visit, a video visit online, or in person, okay? So my schedule usually would be hour and a half first visit, half hour second visit a month later, another half hour visit a month after that. And if somebody is stable, they may still be sick, but they're stable, they're moving forward, then I might start switching out to every 2 months, okay? All right. Good luck to you and your daughter, Will. Thanks for that question. All right, everyone, that's it. I've had a long day here. Unfortunately, I actually wound up working pretty much up to the time of the webinar, so I didn't get to take a little bit of a break beforehand. So I'm kind of worn out here tonight. So that's it for me for tonight. I did enjoy visiting with you, and I look forward to visiting with you again next week too. So in a second here, I'm going to take you back over to the Treat Lyme book if you want to read that. But when I take you there, when I transfer you there, you can also take it as an opportunity to sign up for next week's webinar. Look for your email tomorrow morning between 6 and 6:30 Seattle time. I will get an email out to you with a link to the upcoming or to the video recording of tonight, as well as that will include a link to sign up for next week's webinar as well too. All right. Take care, everyone. Thanks for being here tonight. Good night.